Hey there, this is Alec Soth in St. Paul, Minnesota. And it's just been an awful week here in Minnesota. Um, the murder of Dante Wright, amidst the trial of Derek Chauvin. It's just been so much. And last night I tried to record this vlog, and sirens kept going off and helicopters above, and we've had lockdowns various times this week, and it made me think, should I be doing a vlog this week on goofy little photo books? They seem so inconsequential. So I thought maybe I would talk a bit about that issue itself, what it means to make work when the world is in such a state of upheaval. And I thought it would be a chance to kind of sit in this room and do therapy with myself and kind of talk through this process. Where it starts for me is last weekend. So this is before the Dante Wright killing. And it was springtime. There was this kind of feeling of optimism in the air. And I had this desire to look at landscape photographs. So the first book I pulled out was this one right here. This is by Southam, and it's called Landscape Stories. Get rid of my picture here. Okay. And so this is a real favorite book of mine. It's kind of an overview of Southam's work. It was published in, I want to say 2004 or so. I'm not sure. But it's an absolutely lovely compilation. Now, Southam, his way of working is to photograph one place over and over again. And this book shows a number of those places, and that's what I thought I was going to talk about. But then in the back of the book is this one particular section called The Garden. Let me just zoom in here on the photograph. And this is Southam's backyard as seen through his kitchen window, and in this brief text he talks about looking out on this view while he's doing the dishes each day. And it's a lovely little passage. And there are just a few pictures in the book. I don't know how many there are in the series in total. I would love to see a whole book of these photographs. But it kind of scratched that itch I had for this feeling of emerging spring and just kind of the visual delight of photography. And so I decided to go looking for some more books in my library that scratch that itch. And one that I thought about from this book, New Color, New Work, which is a survey with 18 different photographers. But there's one sequence by Joanne Walters of backyards. And these are at 3 different locations around the country, Ohio, Maine, and Illinois. And they're basically just the 3 different places that Walters had lived in this span of time. This picture is made in 1981. And similar to Southam's work, they're just, very subtle, very beautiful photographs, color, large format, highly detailed. And I've always loved these pictures, and they've held up for me over the years. I return to them again and again. One interesting thing about them is that they function almost like traditional nature pictures in that they don't feel dated in any way. You have these fragments of architecture, but it feels like it could have been made yesterday. Another book that I looked at was this one, Summer Light by Dag Alveng. And this book, I bought a number of years ago. I bought like 10 copies of it. It was so cheap, and I would give it away to people because I think it's a really great book, very understated. And this sequence here at the beginning is just called Walking Around the House. The photographs are printed very light. There's this feeling of being washed in light. This is a nice pairing of pictures here. And also here in a earlier episode of this vlog, I talked about this technique that's sometimes used where this slight movement of time between frames. I think that's really effective here. Dag Alveng's pictures at this time were very evocative of Robert Adams, but he would take the work in different directions as well. Sometimes very surprising pictures like this. And then this self-portrait that I'm quite certain Robert Adams would never take. So I looked at that book, and also this recently published book by Terri Weifenbach. Wifenbach lives, or maybe lived, I'm not sure if she's moved, in Washington, D.C., and these photographs were all made in her backyard. I think she shows her yard here. And it's the pictures are mostly of birds and shown in flight often. It's very shallow depth of field. Incredibly lush pictures. And again, this is the kind of thing I was looking for in this moment of optimism last weekend. But then on Sunday afternoon, there was the news of Dante Wright's murder. And I thought, well, I can't show this work now. Doesn't feel right. And it also didn't feel right to suddenly show work that was, I don't know, that was about police brutality or something like that. It felt forced. And I just started reflecting. And one of the things that came to mind was Josef Sudek. So the thing about Sudek that's so fascinating is the life he lived and the time he lived. So Sudek was in World War One, and while serving on the Italian front, he lost his arm through friendly fire, and was disfigured and came home, and then after the war, he did a little bit of traveling. He actually went back to Italy to photograph, and he just couldn't do it. And he said, that's it. I'm just going back to Prague, and I'm never leaving again. And he developed a significant commercial career, and everything started going great for him. And then Nazism took hold, and along came World War II, and his business fell apart, and lots of his friends left the country, and he was stuck there in his studio. And Sudek was not the kind of photographer to go out in the streets and photograph conflict and that sort of thing. So he was in the studio, and he made his best known series of pictures, which are these window views from his studio. I don't know if they're best known pictures. I think they're his most significant pictures, and definitely my favorite photographs. And so the thing about these studio pictures is that they were all made as contact prints, and he used different large format cameras, so different sizes, and then would produce these contact prints. And sometimes the contacts have these borders, these black borders that function almost like window frames while he's photographing out windows. And Sudek had 2 windows in his studio. The bulk of the pictures are from one window, and they show this tree. And this tree is it's a lone tree out there, and it's kind of warped, and it's hard not to see it as a metaphor for Sudek himself, who was kind of hunched over and with a single limb. It had a unique physical quality. These pictures are also toned differently, and they each become quite individual. So in this case, he'll sign the front of the photograph. Others are printed, with nice borders. They're all different, and it's amazing the amount of variety he gets by virtue of making the glass itself the subject, and the perspiration that collects on it, or the windowsill, and creating still lifes out of the windowsill. This is the other view, and it's more of a city view. I find these pictures with the lights really quite haunting. And I think it just totally changes these photographs to consider the time in which they were made. Again, he started this during World War II, but it carried on for 15 years. But you have to remember that that Czechoslovakia was then under communist rule. So there wasn't an opportunity to make all sorts of different types of pictures. There's a feeling of constraint, and Sudek using these constraints to produce this really extraordinary work. And I guess the thing that I've been thinking about is the value of this work. I'm so glad that Sudek made it during that period. and also how the context of the time period shapes my understanding of the work. A picture like this of a lone leaf, it could be seen as overly romantic or corny, but when you consider the time at which they were made, the place, the person who made them, they take on this other kind of meaning. The variety is just extraordinary, and it was so smart of him to produce these in different sizes with different cameras and different tints. Each photograph is so individual, and I love these still lives. They're so humble, and I think that's the thing about living as we all have lived through this period of the pandemic, and having to learn how to appreciate small pleasures. So after looking at that, I then went back to this recently published book by Robert Adams. This is called Standing Still, and these are all photographs made in his backyard, and they're made over the course of different seasons. And I think what's important about this book for me now is thinking about it as being made in 2020. The idea that we've been through this incredible period of time, which for Robert Adams must be so heartbreaking after years of working on environmental issues, and just to see so much, what's the opposite of lack of progress? So much failure, I guess, within the American system. It just gets worse and worse. And of course, he could publish some sort of screed about that, but instead he decides to just make pictures in his yard, which he says measures 30 feet wide and 60 feet deep. And he's lived there with his wife in Astoria, Oregon for some 23 years. And the book simply moves from spring to fall to winter. Summer's in there too. And in Adam's style, he allows for phone lines, harsh shadows. It's not a glamorized view. One thing that I kind of love about this is that, over the years, Adams became such a hero to so many of us, and to realize that he lives in this very simple place. He doesn't live on a mountaintop in solitude. I think that's wonderful. This picture is funny to me because it's the kind of picture that every homeowner takes out their window of a deer, and there's nothing special about it, but it kind of conveys that feeling that, I mean, a lot of these are just like homeowner snapshots, but then other pictures have a monumental quality. So, so this shadow cutting diagonally across the frame, and this burst of white here with the dark sky, it's an incredible image. These are the winter pictures. And there's this sense of like fading away with this fog. So I think that in time, 50 years from now, people might look at this book in the same way that I'm looking at Sudek's window pictures within the context of time. And somehow that gives me comfort that one is allowed to make work that way. There's one last thing that I want to share, which is while I was thinking about these issues, I started thinking about this series of poems made by Hanif Abdurraqib, and he's a fantastic poet. If you're looking for the spelling, I will show you there. And he did a series of poems which were entitled "How Can Black People Write About Flowers at a Time Like This?" And I encourage you to look up these poems. There are a number of them, and they're all quite different and wonderful. But in an interview, he talks about how these poems came about, and I just want to read this little segment from this interview. He said, "I was at a reading shortly after the election, and the poet, who was black, was reading gorgeous poems which had some consistent and exciting flower imagery. A woman who was white behind me, who thought she was whispering, said, 'How can black people write about flowers at a time like this?'" And he goes on to say, "What is the black poet to be writing about at a time like this, if not to dissect the attractiveness of a flower, that which can arrive beautiful and then slowly die right before our eyes?" So I thought that was another beautiful way to think about subject matter in art in times of turmoil, and allowing for an expansiveness of approaches, and allowing for the photographer that photographs the protests and the uprisings, and also allowing for the photographer who stays at home and photographs flowers in their garden. So something to think about. I hope you're all doing well out there, and take care. Thanks so much.